Hello, everyone. Welcome to our live stream today here at Monticello. I am Laura Michael Balderson. I am a project assistant with the Education and Visitor Programs Department. And we are here today with Krystal Gladden, who is our manager of school programs, and also Carrie Soubra, who is our digital learning coordinator. So we're going to spend some time today talking about the different educational programs that we offer here at Monticello. And we're going to start with Krystal. Can you tell us a little bit about the on-site programs that we offer here at Monticello?
Absolutely. So we have wonderful programs where we're able to bring students of all ages here on site, and we have a guide who stays with them and will talk them through and interpret all of these wonderful spaces from the first floor of the house, going through the gardens and grounds, going through the flower and the vegetable gardens, and going through Mulberry Road, telling the story of the people who lived here, Thomas Jefferson, his children and grandchildren, family members, and of course the enslaved community that lived and worked here as well. And they're able to do this while tying it to things that they're learning in school and tying it to their standards of learning and their curriculum from their various classrooms.
Wonderful. And then we also offer a number of digital programs. So Carrie, can you tell us a little bit about the digital programs?
Yeah, thanks, Laura Michael. We offer two different virtual programs for school groups, and we have a short video that we're going to show you right now to tell you more about it. Greetings from Monticello, the plantation home of Thomas Jefferson, the author of the Declaration of Independence and third President of the United States of America. We are excited to offer two virtual programs that connect your students with the rich history of this historic plantation and further develop their critical thinking and historical inquiry skills without even leaving your home or classroom. Your students will speak with one of our Monticello educators in real time as they explore and learn more about the people and places of Monticello. Our two virtual programs are the electronic field trips and live guided virtual tours. During an electronic field trip, a Monticello educator will use high-resolution images, props, and an online virtual tour to introduce your students to life on this little mountain. Your students will have opportunities to interact with the educator throughout your session. This program runs 45 minutes. For a live guided virtual tour, a Monticello educator will lead your students in real time through the first floor of Thomas Jefferson's mountaintop home. You will get a view of the house and collections and parts of the mountaintop. Your students will have opportunities to ask your educator questions throughout your session, just like they would in an in-person tour. We presently offer two specific focuses for these programs: Jefferson's Monticello and the history of slavery at Monticello. A Jefferson's Monticello focus covers Jefferson's life and how his ideas helped to shape this nation, what daily life at Monticello was like for both the free and enslaved families, and Monticello as an architectural icon. The history of slavery at Monticello highlights specific enslaved people who lived and worked at Monticello and how they retained their family ties and humanity in a dehumanizing system of oppression. Delves into the paradox of Jefferson as a champion of liberty and freedom, yet a lifelong slave owner, and brings history forward by discussing how the institution of slavery has ramifications in the United States throughout its history to the present day. Many teachers use this session as a starting point for teaching the history of slavery in the United States. To find out more or to schedule a session or sessions for your classes, check out our website. We look forward to connecting with you and your students. And we'll provide you with a couple links in the comments if you are interested in signing up for either one of those virtual programs.
Wonderful. Well, can you talk to us a little bit about how many students and teachers we see a year?
Yeah, for our on-site programs, on average in a normal year, we usually see about 58,000 to 60,000 students and teachers for our on-site school programs. Of course, in the last year, that has looked a little bit different, but we've still been able to connect with them. And I know Carrie's going to talk a little bit more about that. And that's not only for schools that are coming for our on-site programs, either self-guided or with our guides, but we also have a program that we do in the fall called Home Educators Day. So we also have homeschool units and homeschool students who also come and engage with our content and with this space as well.
And we'll probably provide a link in the comments about Home Educators Day as well, if you're curious about that. Virtually, in the last year, we saw over 15,000 educators and students, which was really exciting, especially since we got to add the live guided tour option. So we look forward to connecting with people really around the world since we have virtual programs.
And I have to say, as a guide, it was really fun to give live virtual programs over some of the times during COVID over the last year when we could not welcome as many people as we wanted to on site. It was great to be able to participate with visitors around the world virtually. Super fun for us as guides and to learn some new skills. I never thought I'd be carrying a camera through a historic home, right? But something new for the resume. All right, so there are lots of different educational options out there. So can you talk to us about what are the benefits for students to come on site or to take a virtual field trip here?
I mean, I think the biggest benefit is the physical place itself and the power of place. Seeing how students' faces light up when the things that they've read about or things that they've talked about with their teachers in school are actually in front of them, giving them the opportunity to utilize those observational skills, get a sense of the scale when we talk about the daily lives, the activity, the labor that went into Monticello and all of the people that lived here. Once they actually get a chance to see the scale and the movement and see the physical places where the enslaved community lived, see the places where Thomas Jefferson was writing copious amounts of letters, and seeing those different items that they would read about or maybe even see pictures of. But it's something about physically being here and moving through those different spaces that really changes a student's perspective and really ingrains it in their memory. And then we're able to utilize all of that and really bring history to life and make that educational experience a more active one for a lot of those students.
I agree.
Yes, all of that.
One of the benefits of doing a virtual program first would be it allows us at Monticello to reach student groups that would never be able to come here on site. I did mention in my last answer that we have connected with groups from around the world, which has been really exciting. Really speaks to the determination of our school guide staff, because some people were leading tours at 8 o'clock at night, one of those electronic field trips, so that we could connect with school groups in Japan. So despite different time zones, we're still able to connect with students from all around the globe. And I would also say another great benefit is that we are able to adjust or adapt the programs that we offer to really kind of match where the classes are, what they are studying. If they're really deep into Lewis and Clark, we can really focus more on that because we're not constrained by timing in the house with other in-person tours. And so that's really a great benefit, though. If you can come on site, come on site. There's nothing like power of place.
And I think sometimes we see a great benefit whenever students that engage with us digitally do get a chance to also come on site, or teachers that engage digitally also come on site. So sometimes we get the best of both.
Yeah, that's so true. Yeah.
Well, we have a question from the comments here. Natalia wonders if we offer programs in other languages.
Oh, what a great question.
Oh, that's wonderful. Not at this particular moment, but that is something for us to think about, because we have a variety of educational offerings on both in person and digital. Mm-hmm. So maybe that is something that we should think about. Thank you for that.
Yeah, great question.
All right, well, our next question is for you, Carrie. Can you tell us what are some of the stories that students might hear at Monticello?
Yeah, absolutely. Before I became the digital learning coordinator, I was a guide. I still am a guide. I still give tours. And my favorite are school groups. And I think one of the stories that really resonates with students of all ages is the story of Peter Fawcett, who was an enslaved young boy here at Monticello. This is actually a picture of him as an adult, which is really exciting. I always feel really honored that I can actually show a photograph of someone that we talk about. And this is Peter Fawcett as an elder man. But his family, the Fawcetts, were part of the Hemings family, which I'm sure most of our viewers are familiar with that name. The Hemings family were the largest enslaved family at Monticello that really, I think they numbered upwards of maybe a total of 80 family members here. Peter Fawcett, his parents were Joseph Fawcett and Edith Hearn Fawcett. They both were enslaved by Jefferson. Joseph Fawcett would end up becoming the head enslaved blacksmith and actually ran the blacksmithing shop, which is interesting to think about, an enslaved person being in charge of a business here at Monticello, because Jefferson's plantation was his business. That's really how he viewed it. Edith Hearn Fawcett was an enslaved cook and would learn under James and Peter Hemings basically how to become a French chef. They were all enslaved chefs here. And she would spend part of her time separated from her husband cooking for Jefferson up in Washington, D.C. when he was president of the United States. Edith and Joseph Fawcett had 8 children, Peter being one of them. When Peter was a young boy, about maybe 9, is when Jefferson dies. And Jefferson's death struck such fear and uncertainty in the entire enslaved community, because basically everyone on this mountaintop at that time was aware that Jefferson was going to die in substantial debt, and that would have lasting ramifications for the enslaved community. Jefferson only freed 5 males in his will, Joseph Fawcett being one of them. And so what that meant is in January of 1827, when Jefferson's family, through his wife, hosted an auction on the mountaintop to help pay off Jefferson's debt. They sold over 100 enslaved people, actually 130 enslaved people were sold. And that meant Joseph Fawcett had to watch each one of his family members, his wife and his children who were not already given or sold before Jefferson's death, watch them all be auctioned off. And that includes a 10-year-old Peter Fawcett. Joseph Fawcett had a plan. He had a skill. He was a blacksmith. And in his receiving his freedom, he also received the tools of his trade. So he set up a blacksmithing shop in Charlottesville. He approached each new owner of his family member and offered whatever they paid. When he had earned that much money, could he come and buy his wife or his child? And all the slave owners agreed. A man named Colonel Jones is the one who bought Peter Fawcett. When Peter's father eventually earned enough money to buy Peter Fawcett, Colonel Jones said, no, we're much too fond of him. My wife is much too fond of him. He's essential to our family. We're not selling him. But it makes it sound like Peter was part of a family, and that is not all his experience. Peter was experiencing a lot of punishment and violence at the hands of Colonel Jones, because Peter did things like he taught other enslaved people how to read. He continued to try to teach himself to read using a book that his father, Joseph Fawcett, had given him. He later in life would tell a story of tracing letters by a fireplace, and Colonel Jones caught him, threw his book into the fire, and told him if he caught him reading or writing again, he would whip him. And Peter was often caught, not just reading on his own, but teaching others. He also continued to resist being in bondage. He would eventually falsify freedom papers for other enslaved people, including his own sister, who was enslaved at another home in Charlottesville. He eventually would be interviewed as an older man when you saw him in that photo. And one of the things he said is he resolved to get free or die in the attempt. He did not want to be enslaved any longer. And his family, at least the family that his father was able to buy, if you will, they eventually had to leave Charlottesville and move to the then free state of Ohio. And part of the reason is because laws had changed in Virginia that made it very unsafe and unwelcoming for freed Black families to continue to live in the Commonwealth of Virginia. They did not forget about Peter, and Peter, of course, did not forget about them. But remember, Peter was 11 when he was sold at the auction here at Monticello. It's not until he's in his mid-30s that he is actually put up on the auction block, now in Richmond, because he once again had been caught trying to escape. And because he had extended family in this area, they were able to buy him and help him travel out to Ohio so he could finally reunite with his family after 2 decades. And he easily falls into his family businesses, working hard. Of course, his dad had blacksmithing as a trade. His mother opened a catering business that was very successful, right? Because she was such a highly skilled French chef in her enslavement here at Monticello. He also got involved in some family businesses that there's no pay for. He got involved with the Underground Railroad, which is pretty amazing to think that as a young man, he was willing to risk his own life to be free. Now he's free, and he is continuing to risk his life so that he can help others be free. I think this is such an important part of this story that we like to highlight, especially for student groups, because it speaks to the resistance and persistence of people who lived in such a horrible system of oppression and separation. And I think it's important that we have a bit of a balance, because slavery was a terrible, just awful institution. But it's also important that students learn about the triumphs of the people who were enslaved, because they were so strong and because they chose to resist in whatever way they possibly could. When Peter Fawcett gets married, he marries a woman named Sarah. Together, they will eventually help desegregate the streetcars in Cincinnati. They continue to fight for justice for others. He will become a beloved minister at a Baptist church in Ohio as well. And when he is in his 80s, he's so beloved by his congregation and community. They want to give him a gift. What's your wish? What's your one wish, Peter Fawcett? And he said, I want to go home. And home is here, Monticello, which is I really like to pause when I tell that story to really let that sink in, because he was enslaved here. And often with students, I'll ask questions. Why do you think that he wanted to return to Monticello? Why would he call Monticello home? He returns to Monticello. A free man walks through the east front doors. What he would see here at the landscape is not what you would see in person today. Likely other than the cook's room, the space that he probably lived in with his parents when he was very young, most of the external buildings would have demolished over time. But this is when he returns back to his home in Ohio and is interviewed. And one of the most telling things he says is, I did not know I was a slave until I was 10 years of age, standing on the auction block. That's really amazing. And I like to take this opportunity to point out that what a testimony to his parents and the other enslaved parents and families at Monticello. They created a community and made their children feel safe in the most unsafe of places. I really think that is such a powerful testament to all the enslaved people that lived here at Monticello. And I really feel so honored to be able to share the story of Peter Fawcett.
That is one of my favorite of the stories that we know from the enslaved community here, because it is such an assertion of full humanity at every single turn. Thank you for that, Carrie. And can you both talk to us a little bit now about how we talk about the paradox of Thomas Jefferson as author of the Declaration of Independence and also as a lifelong slave owner?
I think one of the great things that we do here, just like you saw Carrie do, in utilizing those personal narratives, that's a very big part, because there are aspects of the story beyond just the names, the dates, and the places that really humanize that experience and create that sense of empathy when it comes to talking about historical content. And we don't hide any of that paradox from students. We're very honest about the fact that these moments that we talk about do impact different groups of people very differently. And that's something I think we've done a very great job in establishing that content with students, talking about the idea behind the Declaration and talking about how that not only impacted what's now the United States of America in that moment of revolution. We talk about the fact that not everybody felt the same way in that moment about becoming an independent nation. And we talked about who the words in this document really impacted and in what eras it would impact them, because it wasn't universal and it wasn't all in that moment. And as I mentioned to my colleagues when talking to students, we talk about the fact that at every moment in Thomas Jefferson's life, that system of slavery and those enslaved people were a constant in his life. And there was an awareness that he had and a decision that impacted not only that generation of enslaved African Americans, but the legacies and generations after them. And we tell them they can hear more of those stories, but we talk to them honestly about how this moment in history and how this document has impacted different groups of people, because we want them to have a true understanding of some of those things that they're probably hearing about as students, and talk to them about the importance of decisions and how decisions do impact not only yourself, but impact others as well.
Yeah, absolutely. You answered that so well. What more can I add? But I also was thinking while you were talking, Krystal, that one of the things I know that our school program guides do, both in person and virtually, because they do all of the things. Is I think we do a great job of adjusting how we discuss things based on the ages and developmental stages we're speaking with. But even at all ages, like Krystal said, we're honest, we talk about it. And I think another great thing that our guides do is, and this is probably going to tie into the next question, sorry, that we talk about how this causes big feelings, right? To find out that Jefferson wrote the words that we all know by heart. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. Yet in his lifetime, his adult life, he owned over 600 different people. That causes big feelings, and that's okay, right? We're going to talk about it, ask questions. I think that's another great thing about both in-person and virtual programs is the interactivity between the guide and the students. So they can really ask tough questions or things that they're thinking about when we're talking about this, what we call here the paradox of liberty with Jefferson. So there are no like firm answers, right, when you're talking about feelings. But I think it really, our goal is to help teachers create critical learners. And so I think that really does a good job of that.
And we have to tell this not only to the students, but to adults who we're sharing this information with as well, that you can hold sort of multiple thoughts and feelings in your body at the same time. And that's okay.
Yeah. And I often find that students are more ready to hold multiple thoughts and feelings at once than adults, right? They're grappling with everything all at once. And so they are more primed to deal with like the complexities of that, even as we talk about it in age appropriate ways with the students. So another thing that we talk about with students that does tie into a lot of these big feelings, for example, is can you talk about how we teach about the legacies of slavery and how we handle difficult history with students, both on-site and digitally?
In doing it on-site, I know there's going to be a lot of similarities into the methods that we utilize, but as I mentioned earlier, utilizing those personal stories is a big part of it, because the African-American community that was enslaved here didn't experience it as one universal monolithic experience. The different roles, the different ways that they intersected with and interacted with other members of Thomas Jefferson and his family, that's part of the narrative here. You have those independent stories like Carrie talked about with the Fawcett family of resilience, resistance, skilled labor, finding access to education, and using that to impact your community. So one of the big things that we utilize are these stories that we have, this well-documented information that we have, and letting students know that the system did exist here and how it impacted the people can be different from one person to another based on access, based on skill, based on opportunity, based on the opportunities that they took, the community that they created, and things that they had to endure. And all of those make that story just a little bit different, and those outcomes a little bit different from one person to the other. And so we want to show them that within that system, there was a lot of variance. And those are the things, and it's one of the reasons that studying history is so important, because not everything was the same for everybody, even if they're experiencing a moment or a system or an experience at the same time. So I think that's a powerful tool that we have to utilize, are those individual stories, at least the amount of them that we know.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Stories are key.
Oh yeah.
And really help students connect to history. I also think one of the tools that both virtual and in-person school guides do is help with definitions. We have kind of specific language training that we do with all of our guides, not just school program guides. And so helping students understand what some of the words we're using, like maybe enslaved. Even at the beginning of our program, I'll often ask students to help me define slavery so that I know that we're all on the same page of what that means before we move forward. I think doing that with students and really giving them the opportunity to help create those definitions gives them some buy-in as well. And just like with the question you asked us before, Laura Michael, about Jefferson and the paradox of liberty, again, just being honest with the information, because that's really what we're sharing. We're sharing truth and facts. It does cause big feelings, and we help students process that as well at their different age levels. But I think just telling school groups, really matter-of-factly, we're not giving them our opinion or sort of sharing our view. We're telling them the story and then talking about what that means. And especially as students get older, we can really also look at the legacy of slavery and how racism, we see that throughout we are a young country. You may not feel that way, but the United States is young. In our young country's history, helping really connect why is studying history important.
Yeah, I think we all do this job because we understand that it's important that we know where we've come from as a country, and how the roots of today's issues are often at the founding of our country, right? And that we like working with kids too, right? Like, so we are happy to greet student groups. And then that we also, that I think builds a lot of empathy within, speaking for myself, but also for colleagues who are wonderful to work with, that just that there's empathy for students who are wrestling with big feelings, right? I often, when I'm giving school programs, think about my nephews, right? And like how gently I would try to help them work through these big issues and like try to bring that same empathy to student groups, because, it's hard for kids to wrestle through this, but they can, right? And we can help them do that, which is the most rewarding part of this job for sure. Okay, so speaking of dealing directly with students, what are some of your favorite responses from students, which is one of the most fun parts of this job, I have to say?
Well, both virtual and in person, we get, sometimes we get like actual feedback through snail mail. It's amazing. We also get wonderful emails, but we want to share our cute little cards that students have made us. I'll let you show the postcards are amazing.
So first of all, can we talk about the artwork on these? These students are so creative, and these are just a couple of many of my favorites. And it's always hard to say favorites because favorites are supposed to be a couple, and then I end up taking the whole pile. I'm like, they're all my favorite. And I'm always so impressed in looking at some of these at not only the things that students remember from their experience here, but even the questions that they ask and the things that they talk about. Like this one, a student saying if they were able to ride on horseback with Thomas Jefferson, they would ask him, why did you not like slavery? And why did you have slaves? and really getting and seeing how much they're thinking deeply about the content that we're sharing. And thinking about not only just the content that they're learning here, but also looking at the different spaces that they've explored. And some of them are commenting on our jobs and what we do. And they think that this is the coolest thing ever, that we get to talk about this history, that we get to help them make connections, and then we get to show people this place and tell these stories. I just love to see how they process this information and the things that they tell us and the things that they ask us, the questions they still have even after they've spent an hour and a half or 2.5 hours talking with us.
Yes, look, these kids are drawing Monticello. Like, I could never. I'm very impressed. I think another really super rewarding feedback to receive is when a teacher will email after, at least in my experience as coordinating the digital programs, and they'll email after a program and share that they heard from parents that the kids have gone home and continue to talk about what was discussed in the program. And I think that is awesome, because that's really, shows that they were engaged, and then that lets me know that we are doing our job really well.
All right. So what do we offer to teachers for training or professional development options?
So one of the biggest ones that we were very excited that we got a chance to do in person again this year is the Monticello Teachers Institute. It's a great opportunity that educators can apply for, and they get to have a sort of intensive week really diving into the stories here, the primary and secondary resources, and learning from technique and content experts, but also sharing their expertise as well. I always tell educators that my job here is to be a resource and an ally for the great work that you're doing in the classroom. So we give them an opportunity to come and see how students can utilize that power of place, learn about all of the resources that we have if they're able to bring students on site, learn about how these primary documents can really be brought to life, especially when coupled with a lot of those personal stories of the people who were experiencing this place during the founding of our nation. So I think that is one of the greatest things that we offer to educators, is that we can be a resource for them and we can be a resource for their students. And one of the best things that comes out of this is that a lot of those relationships with educators we're able to continue. And they sort of become ambassadors for us to help tell other educators about how we can help refresh their curriculum. And this year got a chance to see teachers be sort of re-inspired and reinvigorated as those who are able to go back into the classroom are going back and wanting to offer something new for their students.
Probably our favorite 2 weeks of the whole year, right?
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
All right, well, we have one more question today. So we're gonna close with what is a favorite moment from leading a school or teacher program here at Monticello? And I'm gonna go ahead and share that while we were doing virtual programming over COVID, a lot of times comments that might ordinarily be something that a student whispers to a friend during a tour, instead, these comments ended up in the chat box. And so we got to experience all of the comments. And one of my absolute favorites was a group of fourth graders on a live virtual tour. And we walked into the entrance hall, and we're panning the camera, and there's art and sculptures and natural history specimens and maps and all sorts of things. And this fourth grader types into the chat box, "Luxury, am I right?" And that just made my whole week.
Out of the mouth of babes.
Yes. Oh, that's fantastic. I think for me, and it's sticking in my memory just because it happened recently, is a conversation with a couple of the teachers that came for the Monticello Teachers Institute, and talking about how the experience here really expanded how they thought about talking about the Declaration of Independence and Thomas Jefferson and Monticello, and using those personal narratives in their classroom. There was one educator who came and was already very excited about learning about Thomas Jefferson being here at this space, and when learning about the hundreds of other people who lived in this space, the women, the children, the enslaved community, she said that this really shifted her view, and what didn't necessarily make it negative, but really expanded the lens and the scope that she utilized and was going to utilize and continue to learn more about when she was teaching this history. So I think for me, it was that concept of the students are learning because this teacher took the time to sort of expand their own knowledge about this history, so that way they can be a better informed educator for their students. And I see that partnership as something we worked at together that now these students are going to benefit from, and the teacher can always come back to us and ask for advice and resources, and we're happily going to provide them for her and for her students.
That's awesome. I have two. Do we have time for two? I think for the virtual, specifically for the live guided virtual tour, you get to work in a team. So there's a guide, but there's also the camera person who also is a guide, which is super great because if you forget a piece of information or don't know it, you can ask the camera person, and which I love. But I also love the dynamic because I think it also makes the students and teachers, when they see the warmth and camaraderie between the camera person and the guide, I think it really helps everyone attending that virtual session to feel more comfortable and to ask questions, to see we're not afraid to joke around with each other. And it'll always be so cute at the end, like if Laura Michael was my camera person, and they'll be like, we want to see Laura Michael, so the camera person sometimes has to be on camera. But I love, because I also feel like for that, it's almost like a little peek behind the scenes of what we're doing, because you don't always get to see the camera person or hear us actually in camaraderie, because we don't tag team in-person tours, though we could do that. I would like that. But second, I would say what really stands out to me is we have been doing a version of these virtual programs, gosh, probably for 4 or 5 years now. And it's the way that I have been educated on a resource, and now it's like one of my favorite things to use. When I first got involved with these, there were several English teachers who reached out about a young adult historical fictional book called Jefferson's Sons. And it talks about Jefferson's children with Sally Hemings. And really, there's like 3 different sections. The first is kind of through the eyes of Beverly Hemings, their oldest son. Are there 4 sections? I might be wrong. It looks through the eyes of maybe Madison. And then the final is Peter Fawcett. But I always was resistant to this book because there are parts of it that are fictionalized that kind of fill in holes of information we don't know. But because these teachers reached out and the way they were using it in their classrooms to talk about race and slavery and Jefferson and the Declaration of Independence and what importance just Monticello and the community and people who lived here, I find it to be a super valuable resource now. And I love it when teachers reach out and want to know if we can do a virtual program or discuss with their students about that book. So I have to say that we're not the only ones doing the educating. We also get educated too, which I just love. And then my third thing, because I just wanted to say, I love the interaction with the students. I think our team in person and virtual, they do a great job. And like you said, that's like the most rewarding part of many parts.
And they ask some of the, I was going to say, they ask some of the best questions too.
Yes.
Things that I think all of us have had an experience where a student will make a comment or ask a question, and we're just like, you know what? You're absolutely right. And I'm going to use that when I talk to all of my groups of other ages as well.
Yes, definitely. Well, I want to thank y'all for joining us today, Krystal and Carrie, and I want to thank everyone for tuning in and learning about the educational resources we offer and sending in questions. And we hope that you will join us again next week for our next live stream. Thanks, guys.